They didn't even wait for me to sit down. I had just pulled out the chair at the far end of the conference table, their conference table, polished walnut, leather chairs, framed photos of legacy moments lining the walls, when my uncle cleared his throat. "I think this meeting is for partners only," he said, not looking at me. The room went quiet in that way that feels intentional, planned. My cousin Daniel smirked, flipping his pen between his fingers. My aunt pretended to shuffle papers, suddenly fascinated by a spreadsheet she'd already memorized. My father sat at the head of the table, hands folded, eyes fixed straight ahead. No one spoke up for me. Not one person. "I am a partner," I said calmly. Daniel laughed. "In what? The mailroom?" A few people chuckled, not loudly, just enough to sting. I felt the familiar heat rise in my chest, the one I'd learned to swallow years ago, the one that came from being treated like an accessory instead of an asset. "This is a strategic meeting," my uncle continued, finally meeting my eyes. "We'll go over numbers, contracts, things that require experience." Experience. I had more experience than half the people in this room. I'd just never been allowed to name it. "I was invited," I said. My aunt sighed dramatically. "By who?" I looked at my father. He shifted in his seat, but didn't look back at me. That silence answered the question. "We're discussing the expansion deal," Daniel said, leaning back. "Sensitive information, you understand." I did understand. They didn't want me here, not because I wasn't capable, but because I didn't fit the version of the family business they liked to present. Sons, nephews, last names passed down like trophies. I was useful, just not visible. "Why don't you wait outside?" my uncle said, already reaching for the remote. "We'll fill you in later." Fill me in, like an intern. I looked around the table one last time, at the people who'd watched me work late nights without credit, at the people who'd forwarded my ideas without my name attached, at the people who'd praised my support while taking ownership of the results. I nodded once. "Sure," I said. I stood, pushed the chair back carefully, and walked out without another word. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and just like that, I was excluded from the business my grandfather had started, the business I'd helped keep alive when no one else wanted to touch the mess. I stood in the hallway for a moment, staring at the framed timeline of the company's growth, black and white photos, headlines, smiling men in suits shaking hands, no women, definitely not me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a calendar reminder, 11:30 a.m., legal review call, expansion contract. I smiled faintly. They had no idea. I walked down the hall, past the glass offices, into the smaller conference room reserved for private calls, closed the door, set my laptop on the table. At exactly 11:30, my screen lit up. The lawyer appeared, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, all business. "Good morning," he said. "Shall we begin?" "Yes," I replied. "They're meeting right now." He nodded. Perfect timing. He shared his screen. The contract appeared. Dense pages of legal language, clauses, signatures waiting at the bottom. "I just want to confirm," he said, scrolling, "that you're comfortable with the final terms." "I am," I said. "Excellent," he replied. "This is a significant acquisition. Once executed, it changes the entire ownership structure." I leaned back in my chair. "That's the point." He smiled. "Then let's make sure everything is correct before they see it." I glanced at the clock. They'd be about halfway through their meeting by now, talking projections, patting themselves on the back, assuming I was still waiting outside like a good little assistant. The lawyer scrolled down. "And here," he said, tapping the screen, "is the controlling interest." My name appeared in bold. Not small, not hidden, clear, undeniable. "Once this is disclosed," he continued, "the room may get tense." I smiled. "They already kicked me out," I said. "It can't get worse." "Oh," he replied mildly, "I think it can get much more interesting." I signed digitally. The timestamp appeared. Executed, legally binding, done. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from my cousin Daniel. "Where did you go? Dad wants to know if you're coming back in." I stared at the message, then typed one response. "I'll be there when the contract arrives." 3 minutes later, the email was sent. Not to me, to everyone in that room. The subject line was simple: "Final expansion agreement. Please review." I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and walked back down the hallway. As I reached the conference room door, I heard voices inside, confused, overlapping. What is this? Why is her name? Who approved? I opened the door. Every head snapped toward me.
My uncle's face was pale. Daniel looked like he'd swallowed glass. My father finally looked at me, and for the first time in my life, there was something new in his eyes: recognition. I took my seat. "Sorry I'm late," I said calmly. "Shall we continue?" And that was the moment they realized. Kicking me out of the meeting had been the biggest mistake they'd ever made. No one spoke for a full 5 seconds after I sat down, not the polite kind of silence, the kind that feels like the air has been sucked out of the room. My uncle was the first to recover. He leaned forward, fingers spread on the table, staring at his laptop screen like it might explain itself if he glared hard enough. "What is this?" he demanded. I crossed my legs slowly. "The finalized expansion agreement." Daniel snapped his laptop shut. "Why is your name on it?" Across the table, my aunt looked from one face to another, searching for an ally. "This has to be a mistake." The lawyer's voice came through the speakerphone, calm and precise. "It is not." Every head turned toward the screen. "As outlined in Section 4.2, the lawyer continued, the controlling interest in the acquisition is held by," he paused, then read my name clearly, "the sole managing stakeholder." My father's hand tightened around his pen. "That's not possible. We never agreed to that." The lawyer didn't raise his voice. "You didn't need to." A murmur rippled around the table. Daniel shot to his feet. "This is insane. She doesn't have the authority." I met his gaze evenly. "I do." My father finally spoke. His voice was quiet, strained. "When did you do this?" I didn't rush to answer. 2 years ago, I said, "when you told me the company couldn't afford my proposal." My aunt scoffed. "That was a feasibility issue." "No," I replied. "That was a vision issue." I leaned forward slightly. "You didn't want to expand because it would have required transparency, new partners, new oversight." "That's not fair," my uncle snapped. "It's accurate," I said calmly. The lawyer chimed in again. "The expansion was structured through a separate holding entity, seated privately, fully compliant." Daniel stared at me. "You went behind our backs?" I smiled faintly. "You kicked me out of the room. That doesn't give you the right." "I gave me clarity," I interrupted. My father closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "When did you do this?" I looked at him. "Because you never listened." The words landed heavily. "You told me I was good at execution, not strategy, that I should be grateful to support instead of lead." My aunt shook her head. "This is unbelievable." "Yes," I agreed, "it is." The lawyer cleared his throat. "If I may, once the agreement was executed, the acquisition triggered a restructuring clause." My uncle's face drained of color. "What clause?" "The one that consolidates decision-making authority under the controlling stakeholder, effective immediately." Daniel laughed harshly. "You're saying she's in charge?" I tilted my head. "I always was. You just didn't notice." Chairs shifted. Papers rustled. Someone swore under their breath. My father leaned back slowly, studying me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You planned this," he said. "I prepared," I corrected. "There's a difference." "You let us walk into this blind," my aunt said accusingly. I met her eyes. "You walked in assuming I didn't matter." Silence fell again, thicker this time. The lawyer spoke once more. "I'll remain available for questions, but my role here is complete." The call disconnected.
The room erupted. "You manipulated us. This won't stand. We can contest this." I let them talk. I'd listened for years. They could afford a few minutes of discomfort. Finally, I raised my hand. The room stilled, not because they respected me, but because they were startled. "We can do this one of two ways," I said evenly, "professionally or emotionally." Daniel scoffed. "You think you can just take over?" "I already have," I replied. My father stood slowly. "Why?" The question wasn't angry, it was wounded. Because the company was dying, because legacy doesn't survive on ego. My aunt folded her arms. "So what now?" I glanced around the table. "Now we decide whether this family business stays in the family or becomes a cautionary tale." My uncle clenched his jaw. "You expect us to just accept this?" "No," I said. "I expect you to adapt." Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "You're enjoying this." I shook my head. "I'm ending it." My father exhaled deeply. "We need time." I nodded. "You have until tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" my aunt snapped. "Yes," I replied, "because the market won't wait for family feelings." They stared at me. The same woman they'd just dismissed. The same voice they'd ignored. Except now I wasn't asking to be included. I was informing them. I stood. Meeting adjourned. No one argued. As I walked out, my father called my name. I paused. "You could have told me," he said softly. I turned. "You could have asked." I left before he could respond. In the hallway, my hands were shaking, not from fear, from release. They'd taken my silence for weakness. They'd mistaken access for authority. And now, the real negotiation was about to begin. By the time I reached my office, my phone was already vibrating nonstop. I didn't answer it. Not because I was afraid of what they'd say, but because I already knew. Panic doesn't whisper, it floods. I closed the door behind me, locked it, and sat down slowly, letting the adrenaline drain from my body. My hands were still shaking, but my mind was clear. Clearer than it had ever been. They would try everything now. Denial, blame, legal threats, emotional pressure. And when that failed, they'd come for the one thing they thought would break me: family. The first knock came less than 10 minutes later. Soft, hesitant. I ignored it. Then my phone lit up with my father's name. I let it ring. A minute later, a text followed. "Please, just talk to me." I stared at the message longer than I meant to. Then I typed back, "We'll talk tomorrow, in the boardroom, with counsel present." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No reply. Good, because if we talked now, he'd tried to be my father instead of a businessman, and today, that wasn't allowed. That afternoon, the office buzzed. People moved differently. Conversations stopped when I passed. Emails were sent and unsent. Rumors moved faster than facts. By 5 o'clock, everyone knew something big had happened, but no one knew how big. I stayed late reviewing documents, preparing scenarios, not because I doubted the contract, but because I knew they would. At 7:42 p.m., my cousin Daniel finally cornered me. I was in the parking garage, walking toward my car, when he stepped out from behind a pillar. "You think you're clever," he said. I didn't stop walking. "You should move." He scoffed. "You blindsided us." "I dismissed you," I replied calmly. "That doesn't justify this." I stopped then and turned to face him. "You didn't lose power today. You lost the illusion that you ever owned it." His jaw tightened. "You're tearing the family apart." I met his gaze. "No, I'm removing myself from being torn down." He laughed bitterly. "You think you can run this place without us." "I already have," I replied. He stepped closer. "You need us." I shook my head. "You needed me. You just didn't realize it until now." Silence stretched between us. Then he said the thing I'd expected all along. This won't be the end of it.
I smiled faintly. No, it'll be the beginning. He stormed off. I drove home with the windows down, city lights blurring past, a strange mix of grief and relief settling in my chest. Because power doesn't feel like triumph when it comes at the cost of belonging, but it does feel like truth. The next morning, the boardroom was full, every seat occupied. My uncle, my aunt, Daniel, 2 external advisors, 3 lawyers, and my father sitting at the head of the table again, though his posture was different now. He wasn't presiding, he was waiting. I walked in last. Not intentionally, just naturally. "Let's begin," I said, taking my seat. My uncle spoke first. "We've reviewed the agreement." "And?" I asked. "It's airtight," he admitted reluctantly. Daniel slammed his folder shut. "That doesn't mean we accept it. You don't have to, but you do have to comply with it." My aunt leaned forward. "You exploited internal knowledge." "I leveraged institutional neglect," I said calmly. My father raised a hand. "Enough." Everyone went quiet. He looked at me. "Why didn't you come to me?" I met his eyes. "Because every time I did, you told me to wait my turn." His face tightened. "There was never a turn, just a ceiling." Silence. One of the external advisors cleared his throat. "From a governance perspective, this transition is unconventional, but legal." Daniel snapped. "This is hostile." "No," I said. "This is corrective." My aunt leaned forward. "You want to run the company alone?" "I want to run it competently, with people who respect accountability." "And what about us?" my aunt demanded. I looked around the table, at the faces that had shaped my childhood, my career, my silence. "You have a choice. Adapt or exit." Daniel laughed incredulously. "You'd push us out?" I tilted my head. "You pushed me out first." My father finally stood. "Everyone else," he said quietly, "give us the room." No one argued. When the door closed, it was just the 2 of us. He looked older now, smaller. "I never meant to sideline you," he said. "I know. You just let it happen." He nodded slowly. "You're better at this than they are." It wasn't praise, it was acknowledgement. "And you knew that," I said. He sighed. "I was afraid of what it would do to the family." I met his gaze. "You were afraid of change." He didn't deny it. "What do you want?" he asked. I thought about that carefully. "I want a company that survives," I said, "and a family that stops pretending hierarchy is love." He nodded. "And me?" I softened slightly. "I want you to stop choosing comfort over fairness." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had shifted. "They won't forgive you," he said. "I'm not asking them to," I replied. He nodded once. "Then do what you came here to do." By the end of the week, the restructuring was public. Press releases, market reactions, investor calls. The stock jumped. Quietly, steadily. Performance doesn't care about pride. My aunt resigned 2 days later. My uncle followed. Daniel tried to fight it, loudly, messily, but his leverage evaporated the moment the board realized I'd already secured replacement leadership. He sent me one final message. "You didn't have to destroy us." I typed back one line. I didn't. I stopped being destroyed. The office feels different now. Not quieter, clearer. Decisions are faster. Accountability is visible. People speak without checking over their shoulders. And for the first time since I started working here, no one asks me if I belong. They know. But family reckoning doesn't end with resignations and contracts. It lingers. It waits.
The silence after they resigned was louder than the shouting that came before it. For years, the family business had been noisy, arguments disguised as meetings, decisions delayed by ego, authority passed around like a fragile heirloom no one wanted to break. When my aunt and uncle stepped down, when Daniel stormed out for the last time, that noise vanished. What replaced it wasn't peace, it was vacuum, and vacuums pull. The first week after the restructuring felt deceptively calm. Emails were professional, board members polite. The press coverage focused on bold leadership and a new chapter. Investors were pleased. Employees were cautiously optimistic.
My family, however, was silent. No calls, no messages, no accusations. That worried me more than their anger ever had, because people like them didn't retreat quietly. They regrouped. I found out how a few days later when my assistant knocked on my door, pale and uncertain. "There's a situation," she said. I looked up from my screen. "What kind?" "There's someone here asking to speak with you," she replied. "They say it's urgent. They're family." I felt my chest tighten. "Who?" I asked. She hesitated. "Your grandfather." The room seemed to tilt. My grandfather hadn't stepped foot in the company in years. He was the founder, the name on the building, the myth everyone liked to reference but no one liked to contradict. He was also the one person they'd never tried to push aside. "Send him in," I said. When he walked through the door, he looked smaller than I remembered, older, slower, but his eyes were sharp, still measuring, still commanding. He didn't sit. "So," he said, hands clasped behind his back, "this is what it's come to." I stood. "Good to see you too." He looked around my office, taking in the view, the awards, the quiet efficiency. "They say you staged a coup." I met his gaze. "I executed a contract." He scoffed. "Same thing, different language." "Not really," I replied. "One is emotional, the other is legal." He studied me for a long moment. "You embarrassed them," he said. I nodded. "They embarrassed themselves." His jaw tightened. "This business was built on family." "It was built on work," I said calmly. "Family benefited from it." He stepped closer. "You've fractured something that can't be repaired." I didn't look away. "It was already broken. I just stopped pretending it wasn't." He sighed, a heavy sound. "Your aunt came to me, your uncle too. They're furious." "I'm aware. They want me to intervene." "And?" I asked. He smiled thinly. "They think I can undo this." I raised an eyebrow. "Can you?" He looked at me, truly looked at me for the first time in a long while. "Legally," he said, "no." "Then what are we talking about?" I asked. "Legacy, respect, blood." I folded my arms. Blood didn't stop them from kicking me out of a meeting. He flinched slightly. "They underestimated you," he admitted. "So did I." I waited. He took a breath. "They want you to step aside, let the men take control again, quietly." I laughed, not mockingly, but honestly. "No." His eyes narrowed. "You don't even want to hear the offer?" "I don't need to," I replied. "It's the same one they've always made. Less visibility, less resistance, more comfort for them." He stared at me for a long moment. "You know what they'll do if you don't comply," he said. "Yes," I replied. "They'll try to ruin me." He nodded slowly. "And they'll fail." That surprised me. "Why?" I asked. "Because you did something they never learned how to do," he said. "You prepared instead of posturing." He turned toward the door, then paused. "You've changed the company," he said, "whether they like it or not." "And you?" I asked. He glanced back. "I'm old enough to know when a chapter has ended." He left without another word. I sat down slowly, heart pounding. That wasn't the attack. It was the warning. The real attempt came a week later. An anonymous tip hit the press, allegations of impropriety, insider manipulation, conflict of interest. Nothing concrete, just enough to raise eyebrows. The story spread fast. My phone rang non-stop. Legal, PR, board members asking careful questions. I didn't panic because I had expected this. The lawyer I'd worked with for years called me directly. "They're fishing," she said. "No evidence, just noise." Then we respond with facts. We did. Documents, timelines, audit trails, every decision accounted for. Within 48 hours, the story collapsed under its own weight. Retractions followed quietly. But the damage they'd hoped for didn't land, because something else happened instead. Employees rallied. People I'd never spoken to directly emailed me, thanking me for transparency, for decisive leadership, for ending years of internal dysfunction. The board released a statement of confidence. The market responded positively. The family watched it all unfold, powerless. My cousin Daniel sent me one final email. Not angry, not threatening, just bitter. "You've turned us into strangers." I read it once, then archived it. Because what he didn't understand was this: they had made me a stranger long before I took control.
By refusing to see me, by silencing me, by deciding my role without my consent. I hadn't changed the rules. I'd played by the only ones that mattered, the contract. The building felt different when I walked in that morning. Not quieter, not emptier, just settled. For the first time since the restructuring, there were no hushed conversations when I passed, no sideways glances, no careful pauses mid-sentence. People were working, not watching. That's how I knew it was over. Not because my family had stopped fighting, not because the press had moved on, but because the company had stopped holding its breath. I stepped into my office, set my bag down, and stood for a moment by the window, looking out over the city. The skyline was familiar, steady, indifferent to family drama and legacy disputes. Buildings didn't care who owned them. They stood because they were built correctly. That thought stayed with me. At 9:17 a.m., my assistant knocked. "There's a courier," she said. "He asked for you specifically." I frowned. "Did he say who it's from?" She shook her head. "No return name." I told her to send him in. The man handed me a thick envelope, required a signature, then left without a word. The paper was heavier than it needed to be, expensive, intentional. I closed my door before opening it. Inside was a single document, a notarized letter, from my grandfather. I read it once, then again. It wasn't long, no accusations, no dramatics, just facts. He acknowledged the contract, confirmed he would not challenge the restructuring, formally resigned his remaining advisory role. At the bottom was a single handwritten line. "You did what none of us had the courage to do. Don't apologize for it." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That was it. No reconciliation dinner, no emotional reckoning, no family meeting where everyone suddenly understood each other. Just closure, the cleanest kind. Later that day, the board met. Routine now, efficient, focused. Decisions were made quickly, disagreements were handled directly. No one deferred to a last name. After the meeting, one of the newer board members lingered. "I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I wanted to say something." I nodded. "Go ahead." "I've been on a lot of boards," she said. "Family-run, founder-led, legacy-heavy companies, they rarely survive the third generation." I smiled faintly. "We're trying to be the exception." She shook her head. "No, you already are."
That mattered more than she knew. That evening, I drove past my parents' house without slowing down. The lights were on, curtains drawn, life continuing without me. And for the first time, that didn't feel like rejection. It felt like release. I didn't cut them off. I didn't block numbers. I simply stopped reaching first. Weeks passed, then months. The company grew, not explosively, but sustainably. Partnerships strengthened, processes improved. The culture shifted in ways that were subtle but irreversible. People spoke up. Mistakes were addressed instead of buried. Credit was shared instead of hoarded. And no one ever asked me again if I belonged in the room. One afternoon, long after the dust had settled, I ran into my father unexpectedly, a cafe near the office. He looked older than I remembered, not frail, just worn. We stood there for a moment, unsure how to begin. "You look well," he said finally. "So do you," I replied. He nodded toward the empty chair at my table. "May I?" I hesitated, then nodded. We sat in silence for a bit, sipping coffee like strangers learning each other's rhythms. "I should have done more," he said quietly. I didn't respond immediately. "I know," I said eventually. He winced, not at the words, but at how easily I said them. "You were always capable," he continued. "I just didn't know how to step aside." "I didn't need you to step aside. I needed you to step up." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." We didn't fix everything that afternoon, but we didn't reopen old wounds either. That was enough. When we stood to leave, he paused. "I'm proud of you," he said. Not loudly, not performatively, just honestly. I nodded. "Thank you." And for the first time, I meant it when I said it. That night, alone in my apartment, I thought about the meeting they'd kicked me out of, the casual dismissal, the smirks, the assumption that power lived where it always had. They thought excluding me would weaken me. What it actually did was clarify everything. It showed me who would never make space for me, and more importantly, it showed me I didn't need their space at all. Power isn't inherited. It's built, quietly, patiently, without asking permission. They kicked me out of the family business meeting because they believed the room belonged to them. The contract revealed my name because I had built something they never bothered to look for. And when the dust settled, when the noise faded, when the last attempt to reclaim control failed, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Free from proving, free from performing, free from shrinking to preserve someone else's comfort. The company didn't need their approval to move forward, and neither did I. That's how it ended. Not with applause, not with revenge, but with the quiet certainty that I would never again be asked to leave a room I had already built myself.